For all the many immeasurable things I love about being a Unitarian Universalist minister, there's one thing that I particularly dread, and that is telling strangers what I do for a living. So this happens more often than not, especially in the DC area, when what you do is really, really important. And being relatively new, a year in, when I meet people, I'm still asked what I do for a living, no matter almost where we're at or what we're doing. And the conversation always goes something like this. So, what do you do for a living? You wouldn't guess it if I told you. And then I always say just like this, so I'm a minister. And they scan me real quick, and they look at the facial piercings, and my tattoos are usually showing, and I have plenty more than most of you have seen. And so they look at me, and they're a little confused, so I feel like I need to overqualify and clarify what nobody ever asked. So I say, well, don't get me wrong, I'm not a Christian. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not a Christian minister. And then they say, and then I pause and I say, I'm a humanist, which clarifies absolutely nothing for them. So I'm like, okay, now they think I'm a humanist minister, which doesn't make sense to a lot of people. So I say, I'm a Unitarian Universalist minister. And that makes it even more confusing, because then almost 9 times out of 10, there is radio silence after that, unless you're in Boston. Everyone knows who yous are if you're in Boston. So unless you're in Boston, no one really always knows exactly what Unitarian Universalists are. And I try to explain it. I say something like, well, okay, so we believe a lot of things, but it's not just so loosey-goosey. You can't just believe whatever you want. But then again, you can. And, you know, there's a lot of different beliefs that go on, and some people are Christians, but most people aren't. Some people are Buddhist, or you can be atheist, or you can be humanist, and you know, it's non-creedal. You don't know what it means? Okay, we don't have one central belief, but we have like 7 beliefs, but we call them principles. And you know what? I'm just trying to use the bathroom. Can you just look this up online? It'll explain it a lot more. It's so hard to explain who we are and what we believe, because belief isn't all that central for us. And so I'm curious, though. I'm very curious about what you all say as your elevator speeches. That's my elevator speech. Not really that great, right? And I went to seminary. I am literally a minister. And my elevator speech isn't that great, so I'm curious what yours are. So introverts, I apologize, I'm one of you. This would be the point where I would walk out of the room. But I'm going to invite you to turn and greet your neighbor by telling what your elevator speech is to one another. So take no more than 2 minutes, and say how you would describe Unitarian Universalism to somebody who didn't know what it was. I'm going to ring the bell, the singing bowl, after 2 minutes, and you can flip-flop and let the other person share, but no more than 2 minutes, okay? So turn, find someone, and talk. So how did that go? Was it pretty straightforward? Just had this beautiful thing laid out, perfectly understandable and explainable? For those of you who may be new or who don't know a lot about Unitarian Universalism, whatever you shared was probably on par with someone who's been doing this for 20 years. So don't worry. The earlier reading made me think about this question of how do we talk about who we are? And I think a lot of us have had those kind of conversations and realizations in the past where we realize that often as we describe ourselves by saying what we're not rather than what we are. It's just a kind of a challenge that we have, because it almost seems like a lot of our identity, collective UU identity, is based on just the dissenting tradition of moving away from these kind of more theological set, orthodoxical concepts. So we really have an individual identity around what we're not. But the reading made me think of all of the things that we are. And the reason why we're not super set on talking about, like, this is what I believe, and this is what I believe, and here's my cosmology, and here's what happens when you die, and all of that, is because for us, it's a lot more clear about who we are based on what we do together. It's really interesting when you frame it as, what do we do as a community? What do we do individually within River Road? And that starts giving people much more of a picture of what Unitarian Universalism is. So the second and final activity I'll ask you to share with your neighbor, a different neighbor, is to reflect on something you've done here at River Road before, or that you're currently doing. It can be any area of service, any area of stewardship, serving on a committee, a one-time event, any kind of thing that you've done at River Road or you are currently doing. Maybe it was attending RE. Maybe you're still attending RE. Whatever it was, think about that. But rather than sharing about what you did or what you are still doing, share about why you did or are doing what you are doing. What was the reason for that service? What was the motivating factor that got you involved in that event, or got you involved in that group, or got you involved in that one-time thing that we did here, knowing we do so many things? So reflect on that. Once again, don't take any more than a minute or two to do so, and focus on the why, not just the what. Go. So I invite you to return to the space. Thank your neighbor that you shared with. Thank yourselves for the willingness to share. Like I said, as an introvert, these are the times when I actually just go use the bathroom, walk out of the room. So thank you for being willing to share. And I wanted to do that because I know how involved this community is. We do so much here at River Road. We're a people who are defined so much by what we do. So we can just ask Jessie, who is our wonderful admin assistant, about that. She toils over our church calendar. If you've planned an event or an activity here at River Road within any given period of time over the last couple of years, Jessie has been the one that you've been dealing with. And she can tell you that there's scarcely a day without some kind of meeting or event or activity in this building, and actually beyond this building. We are engaged and we are active and we're always ready for more. And I'm sure we all have stories about doing that kind of work here. Stories of joy and purpose, stories of harm, stories of conflict, stories of triumph, complicated stories and silly, light-hearted adventures all the same. But doing a lot, And having a full calendar, it isn't all that there is to labor. And in fact, it's not all that there is to this community at River Road. There's always a labor within the labor, a hidden and unseen or even unplanned kind of work that is necessary for the tangible and measurable outcome. And often we don't know how that unseen work will manifest. Sometimes it does manifest as conflict or doubt or worry. And that can be really powerful when we allow that conflict to do its job, or when we transform the doubt into connection, or when we allow worry to take a back seat. In my experience, that unseen labor usually manifests itself through learning about myself, learning about my own stuff, learning how to navigate those conflicts and complications that always come up for me in my life as I do the work that I do. Learning how to be more authentic, learning how to be more honest. And the lessons, they seem to never cease, and it's kind of a blessing, but it's also kind of exhausting. But the work is here nonetheless. When we dig into the work within the work, I believe that's where we begin to find the truth of our labor, the deep purpose of why we do what we do. And I believe that when we tap into that truth, we liberate ourselves from the cycles of disappointment and dissatisfaction and burnout. As a faith community with service as one of the three words that defines our mission in the world, it's all too easy to overlook the labor within the labor. But there's another word in our mission that always brings us back to ourselves and brings us back to the ground and brings us back to each other. And we all know that that word is love. When we shared our stories of service and stewardship in this community, we shared why we served, and I bet that each story had an underlying reason of responsibility. Knowing somewhere deep within that we are responsible for this community that we share together, and therefore we are responsible to one another. I was going to read Toni Morrison's address at the Writers' Congress, and she basically said to those writers, talking about the danger of individualism in a capitalist society, the danger as writers of not being able to associate together and discuss different things such as contracts or negotiations or publisher issues or fees, etc. This danger of being separate. And she talks about this lore of the horror story in terms of literary writers. She talks about the writers who become infamous from dying premature deaths or being lonely or being depressed. The great works of art that came from people like Hemingway, people who were known to have battled numerous demons publicly. And she says she does not like those horror stories, that we don't have to keep creating the same stories with this idea under this guise that the more stressed we are, the more depleted we are, the more productive that we are. Or that productivity dictates our worth or our value, that we can write new stories. We have a full calendar, and that's great, but it's not what we do. It's how we do it. And we know that. We know how quickly and easy it is to become overscheduled and overburdened, and to think that the answer is to do more, to find something new. But guess what, friends? There is no such thing as enough. You can drink tons of water, an adequate amount of water, and it's still not enough because you'll need more the next day. There is no such place as enough. And there is no such destination as the beloved community. We create that beloved community in the work that we do. And that, to me, is a tangible type of love. A love that you can hold on to. A love that you can create. A love that's not abstract. That's not just a word. That's the labor within the love. So as we dust off the sand from our flip-flops and we trade in our beach reads for our day planners, let us move into this busy season making space for the labor within the labor, allowing that labor to invite us further into love, further into ourselves, and further into community. Because as Unitarian Universalists, we find value and truth in a wide range of beliefs and traditions, whether they be religious or non-religious, spiritual, earth-based, or reason-based. Rather than hold to one theological belief, we affirm 7 principles that guide us as we travel our shared path, and we covenant with one another as a way to navigate our time while we do the work of love and justice for ourselves, our communities, and our wider global village. And that's my actual elevator speech, if any of you ever want to use it. Blessed be, and Ashe.